The wedding ring felt like a shackle, and by morning, her husband was gone, not just from the room, but from her life. Alistair Blackthorne married Evelyn Harrow to settle a debt, nothing more. She was meant to fade into the wallpaper of his empty estate, another forgotten wife in a city that erased women like morning fog. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Evelyn Harrow had no intention of disappearing. This is the story of a woman who walked into a marriage designed to silence her and turned it into a weapon. A revolution that started in whispers and ended with the most powerful men in England on their knees. If you want to see how far this story goes, how one invisible woman brought an empire to its breaking point, stay until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to know just how far Evelyn's story travels. The carriage smelled like rot and desperation. Evelyn pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching London's gray streets blur past. Rain streaked the glass, turning the world outside into something formless and distant, which felt appropriate. Everything in her life had become formless, distant, not quite real. Her father sat across from her, his face sagging with the particular exhaustion of a man who'd gambled away everything and lost. He hadn't looked at her directly in 3 days, not since he'd told her. "You'll marry the Duke of Blackthorne," he'd said, voice flat as old beer. "It's arranged. No preamble, no apology, just a statement of fact, like telling her it might rain or the butcher had raised his prices." Evelyn had stood in their shabby parlor, the one they hadn't sold yet, and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I don't know the Duke of Blackthorne." "You don't need to know him. You need to marry him." "Father, don't." His hand came up, trembling slightly. From drink or shame, she couldn't tell. "Don't make this harder than it already is." But it wasn't hard for him, was it? He wasn't the one being sold. Now, 3 days later, the carriage wheels clattered over cobblestones, carrying her toward a church, and a man whose face she'd seen exactly once, in a newspaper illustration that made him look like a marble statue, cold, distant, untouchable. "He's older," her father had offered, attempting comfort in the worst possible way. "Settled. You'll want for nothing. Except choice, except freedom, except a life that belonged to her." The carriage slowed. Through the rain-smeared window, Evelyn saw the church, St. Margaret's, tucked into a corner of Mayfair like an afterthought. Small, gray, practical. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction, and even the venue knew it. Her father cleared his throat. "Evelyn," she looked at him. "It's a good match. Better than—" He stopped. "Better than you deserve," he'd been about to say. Better than a ruined gentleman's daughter could hope for. "I know," she said quietly. The carriage door opened. Rain misted in, carrying the smell of wet stone and coal smoke. A servant in Blackthorne livery stood waiting, his face carefully blank. He'd probably seen this before, girls delivered like parcels, handed over to settle debts. Evelyn stepped down. Her shoes touched the slick pavement, and for one wild moment she considered running. Just lifting her skirts and bolting into the labyrinth of London streets, disappearing into the fog and smoke and anonymous crowds. But she didn't. She walked into the church. The interior was dim, lit by candles that threw more shadow than light. A handful of people sat scattered in the pews, witnesses probably, pulled from Blackthorne's staff because heaven forbid this charade have actual guests. No one from Evelyn's side. Her mother was 8 years dead, and what few friends she'd had vanished when her father's creditors came calling. At the altar stood a vicar who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and beside him, Alistair Blackthorne. Evelyn's breath caught. The illustration hadn't lied. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired. But what the sketch had failed to capture was the absolute absence in his eyes. He looked at her the way one might look at a signature that needed witnessing, necessary, tedious, forgettable. She walked down the aisle alone. Her father had deposited her at the door and retreated to a back pew, as if proximity to his own shame might burn him. The vicar began. Latin phrases Evelyn barely heard, legal words that bound her life to a stranger's. Blackthorne's voice was deep and flat when he spoke his vows. Each word clipped short like he was trimming expenses from a ledger. "I do." The vicar turned to her, waiting. Evelyn looked at Blackthorne, really looked, tried to find something, anything behind that frozen expression, a flicker of humanity, discomfort, regret. Nothing. "Miss Harrow," the vicar prompted. She thought about that moment in the carriage, the wild urge to run. "I do," she whispered. The words tasted like ashes. There was no breakfast, no celebration. The marriage certificate was signed in a vestry that smelled of mildew, Blackthorn's signature a harsh slash of black ink. He didn't look at it, didn't look at her. "The carriage will take you to Thornfield House," he said, first words he'd spoken directly to her. "Mrs. Hewitt will see you settled." "You're not—" Evelyn stopped. Of course he wasn't coming. Why would he? "I have business in the city." He pulled on his gloves, each finger tugged into place with mechanical precision. "I'll return when it's concluded." "When will that be?" Finally, he looked at her, not at her face, somewhere past her left shoulder. "I couldn't say." And then he walked out. Evelyn stood in that mildewed vestry, rain drumming against the window, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart. That was still intact, if bruised. Something else. Some naive, desperate hope she hadn't realized she'd been clutching. He wasn't cruel. That would have required caring enough to inflict pain. He was worse. He was indifferent. Jose. Thornfield House rose from the London sprawl like a mausoleum. Evelyn stared up at it from the carriage. 5 stories of gray stone, windows like dead eyes, walls that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. This was her home now, this monument to money and power and absolute joylessness. The door opened before she could knock. Mrs. Blackthorne. The woman who greeted her was 60 if she was a day, built like a pike and twice as sharp. "I'm Mrs. Hewitt, housekeeper." "Mrs. Hewitt." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. I know who you are." Not unkind, just factual. "Come in out of the rain." The entrance hall was cavernous. Marble floors, a staircase that swept upward into shadow, portraits of dead Blackthorns glaring down with the same empty eyes as their descendant. "Your rooms are on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Hewitt said, already moving. "East wing. The Duke's apartments are west. You won't be disturbed." The phrasing made Evelyn's stomach turn. "You won't be disturbed." As if disturbance, contact, conversation, basic human acknowledgement was something to be avoided. They climbed and climbed. The house seemed to unfold endlessly, corridors branching into more corridors, rooms opening onto more rooms, all of it empty, echoing. "How many staff?" Evelyn asked. 12 live-in. Cook, scullery maid, 2 housemaids, footman, butler, myself. The others come daily. "And the Duke, is he often in residence?" Mrs. Hewitt's mouth pressed into a line. "His Grace keeps rooms in the city, for business." Which meant no, he wasn't often here, possibly never here. Her rooms, when they finally reached them, were fine. Better than fine. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed large enough to sleep 4. A sitting room with furniture that had never been sat in. A dressing room that could house a family of 8. All of it empty. All of it waiting to swallow her whole. "I'll have tea sent up," Mrs. Hewitt said. "Dinner is at 8. The Duke maintains formal hours even in his absence, even though he's not here." "Yes." The housekeeper left. Evelyn stood alone in her beautiful, enormous, empty rooms and felt the walls close in. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she explored. Not the house. That felt too dangerous somehow, like trespassing in her own prison. But her rooms. She opened drawers and found them bare, checked wardrobes and found them empty except for 3 dresses someone had hung there, simple, gray, appropriate for a wife in mourning. Mourning what? Evelyn couldn't say. Her freedom, probably. In the sitting room, she found a writing desk, good paper, fresh ink, quills that hadn't been used. She sat down and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Dear Mother," she wrote, then stopped. Her mother was dead, had been dead since Evelyn was 14, and yet, "I married today. A Duke. You'd be proud, I think, or at least relieved that I'm settled. Father certainly seems relieved. The weight of his debts lifted by my signature on a piece of paper, the quill scratched across the page. He didn't look at me. Not once. Not during the ceremony, not after. He said perhaps 10 words total, and most of those were vows he clearly didn't mean. I know what you'd say. That marriage isn't about love, that security matters more than sentiment, that I should be grateful. She paused. I'm trying to be grateful. I'm trying very hard. The ink blotted. Evelyn set down the quill. Outside, London rumbled and hissed, a city that never truly slept. Carriages clattered past. Somewhere, someone was shouting. The sounds felt very far away, muffled by stone and money and the particular silence of houses like this one, houses that held women like jars on a shelf. 3 days passed. Evelyn ate meals alone in a dining room built for 20. She walked the corridors and counted rooms, 34, not including servants' quarters. She stood at windows and watched London move below her, a river of life she was no longer part of. The staff were polite, distant. They called her Your Grace and Mrs. Blackthorne, and never ever looked her in the eye. On the 4th day, she found the library. It was on the 2nd floor, tucked behind a door she'd assumed led to a linen closet. But when she opened it, she found books, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, thousands of them. More books than she'd seen in her entire life. Evelyn stepped inside and felt something unclench in her chest. Here was proof that someone in this house had been alive once, had wanted something, cared about something beyond ledgers and appearances. She ran her fingers along the spines. Philosophy, history, science, poetry, though precious little of it. Mathematics, law, agriculture treatises, ship manifests, accounting records going back decades. And in the corner, on a small table near the window, a stack of newspapers. Recent ones. Evelyn picked up the top paper. The Times, 3 days old. The headline screamed about factory conditions in Manchester, children working 16-hour days, conditions that killed them before they turned 12. She read the whole thing standing there. Then the next article, and the next. By the time the dinner bell rang, she'd read through a week's worth of papers and discovered something terrifying. The world was burning, and no one with power cared. On the 7th day, Mrs. Hewitt knocked on her door. His Grace has sent word, the housekeeper said. He'll be delayed another month. Business in Cornwall. Another month. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn looked at the older woman. Really looked. Mrs. Hewitt, may I ask you something? Of course. The previous Duchess, what was she like? Something flickered across Mrs. Hewitt's face. There was no previous Duchess, ma'am. His Grace has never been married before. Then why? Evelyn stopped. Why the separate wings? Why the formal meals for one? Why this entire elaborate performance of a marriage that didn't exist? Mrs. Hewitt's expression softened, just slightly. His Grace values order, predictability. His household runs according to established rules. Rules he's not here to follow. Yes, ma'am. After the housekeeper left, Evelyn sat in her sitting room and felt fury kindle in her chest. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind that burned slow and steady. She'd been delivered to this house like furniture, placed in her designated rooms, expected to exist quietly until she faded into the wallpaper. But Evelyn had spent 7 days watching London from her windows, reading newspapers in a borrowed library, eating meals alone in a dining room built for ghosts. And she'd realized something. The Duke of Blackthorne had made a mistake. He'd given her time, resources, access to information. He'd given her a prison, yes, but he'd forgotten to lock the door. The next morning, Evelyn did something radical. She went outside, not far, just to the garden behind the house. But it felt like crossing a border into foreign territory. Mrs. Hewitt watched from a window, probably wondering if the new Duchess was about to make a run for it. The garden was as neglected as everything else. Overgrown paths, weeds choking what had once been flower beds. A fountain in the center, dry and cracked. Evelyn walked to the fountain and sat on its edge. She could see over the garden walls from here, could see the houses that pressed up against Thornfield's boundaries. Smaller homes, working-class dwellings, Laundry hung from windows. Children played in the narrow street. Life happened there, messy and loud and real. A woman appeared at one of the windows, young, tired-looking, bouncing a crying baby on her hip. She glanced up and saw Evelyn. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two women separated by a stone wall and an entire universe of circumstance. Then the woman nodded. Once. Brief. Evelyn nodded back. It was the first genuine human contact she'd had in a week. That afternoon, she called for Mrs. Hewitt. "I'd like to know the household accounts," Evelyn said. The housekeeper blinked. "Ma'am?" "The accounts. What we spend on food, coal, staff wages. I'd like to see the books." "The Duke handles all financial matters personally." "The Duke isn't here." A pause. Mrs. Hewitt's face betrayed nothing, but Evelyn saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Finally, "I'll have them brought to your sitting room." The ledgers arrived an hour later. 3 years' worth of meticulous records. Every penny that had flowed through Thornfield House, documented in Blackthorn's harsh, precise handwriting. Evelyn spread them across her desk and began to read. Food costs? Reasonable. Coal? Appropriate for a house this size. Wages? Actually generous, which surprised her. Staff maintenance thorough. Repairs? Regular. And at the bottom of each month's accounting, a separate entry. Charitable donations, £0. Evelyn stared at that zero. The Duke of Blackthorn was worth, she'd looked this up, approximately £40,000 a year. His house ran on a fraction of that. He owned properties across England that generated income while he slept. And he gave nothing away. Not one penny to the workhouses, the orphanages, the hospitals that turned away sick children because they couldn't pay. She thought about those newspaper articles, the factory conditions, the starvation wages, the women who died in childbirth because they couldn't afford a doctor. She thought about the woman in the window with her crying baby, and she made a decision. "Bossy." "Mrs. Hewitt," Evelyn said the next morning, "I need the names of reputable employment agencies." "Ma'am? I've been reviewing the household operations. We could use additional help. I'd like to interview candidates myself." It was a lie. A small one, but a lie nonetheless. Mrs. Hewitt looked uncertain. "His Grace typically handles all hiring." "His Grace isn't here," Evelyn repeated. "And I believe he'd agree that a well-run household requires proper staffing." She held the housekeeper's gaze, steady, unwavering. Finally, Mrs. Hewitt nodded. "I'll prepare a list." The agency sent candidates. Evelyn interviewed them in the library one after another. Women, mostly. Young, desperate, fleeing situations that ranged from difficult to dangerous. She hired none of them for Thornfield. Instead, she made notes, names, situations, skills. By the end of the week, she had a list of 30 women who needed work, and a rough map of which factories and workshops were hiring, and which ones had conditions that wouldn't kill you within a year. She started making introductions. Quiet ones. A woman who could sew connected to a dressmaker who needed help. A woman who could read connected to a school that needed a junior teacher. Nothing official. Nothing that would appear in any ledger. Just connections. Just women helping women survive. 3 weeks after her wedding, Evelyn received her first letter from her husband. It arrived with the morning post, delivered to her sitting room on a silver tray. Heavy paper, Blackthorn's seal. She stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Mrs. Blackthorn, I trust you are settled. Mrs. Hewitt reports the household continues to function appropriately. My business in Cornwall extends longer than anticipated. I will return to London by month's end, but will maintain my city apartments for the season. This should cause you no inconvenience. Yours, Blackthorn." Evelyn read it twice. Not "Dear Evelyn," not "Your husband." Just Blackthorn, Taka, like he was signing a contract. "This should cause you no inconvenience." She laughed, actually laughed, a sound that echoed weird and broken in her empty sitting room. He genuinely believed she'd been sitting here waiting for him, that his absence was the hardest part, that his return would somehow matter. He had no idea what she'd been building in his absence. No idea at all. By the end of the month, Evelyn's quiet network had grown. Not large, not organized, just 30 women who knew they could send word to Thornfield House if they needed help, who knew that the strange Duchess, the one who never went to parties or received callers, would find them work if they needed it, would connect them to doctors who didn't charge, would write letters to landlords on expensive paper that made threats sound official. It wasn't charity. Evelyn hated charity. Hated the way it made people grovel and scrape and perform gratitude for scraps. This was something else, something reciprocal. The women she helped remembered. And when Evelyn needed information, which factories were hiring, which landlords were raising rents, which areas of London were becoming too dangerous for women alone, they told her. She started mapping it. Drawing connections on paper she kept locked in her desk. London's hidden architecture of survival, drawn in ink and desperation. And slowly, carefully, she started to understand how power actually worked. Not in Parliament, not in drawing rooms, in the space between what was legal and what was possible, in knowing who needed what and who could provide it, in information. Alistair Blackthorne returned to London on a Tuesday. Evelyn learned this not from him, but from Mrs. Hewitt, who announced it at breakfast with her usual neutral expression. His Grace arrived at his city apartments last night. He'll call tomorrow afternoon to discuss household matters. Call? Evelyn set down her tea. Here? Yes, ma'am, 2 o'clock. So, a visit to his own house, to see his own wife, how generous. Evelyn spent the rest of the day preparing. Not primping, that would have been pathetic. But she dressed carefully in one of the gray dresses, pulled her hair back in a style that suggested competence rather than decoration, and waited in the drawing room like she was preparing for a business meeting. Because that's what this was. Business. What? He arrived exactly at 2. Evelyn heard the door, heard the butler's murmured greeting, heard footsteps crossing the marble hall. Then the drawing room door opened, and there he was. Alistair Blackthorne looked exactly as he had a month ago. Same harsh face, same empty eyes, same expression that suggested he was counting seconds until he could leave. Mrs. Blackthorne. He didn't bow, didn't smile, just stood there like a statue that had wandered in by mistake. Your Grace? Evelyn remained seated. Let him stand. A flicker of something crossed his face, surprise maybe that she wasn't falling over herself to greet him properly. It vanished quickly. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. They're adequate. Mrs. Hewitt mentioned you've been interviewing for additional staff. Ah, so that's what this was about. She'd overstepped. I reviewed the household accounts, Evelyn said calmly. We're understaffed for a house this size. We manage. The staff manage. Through overwork. His jaw tightened. The household budget is my concern. Of course, I wasn't suggesting otherwise. She folded her hands in her lap. I was merely making observations. They stared at each other. Evelyn felt her heartbeat kick up, but kept her expression neutral. She'd learned something in the past month. Power was performance. If you acted like you belonged somewhere, people believed you, even dukes. In the future, Blackthorne said slowly, consult me before making changes. I haven't made any changes. Mrs. Hewitt said, I interviewed candidates. I hired no one. There's nothing in our agreement that prevents me from conducting interviews. Our agreement. Our marriage, Evelyn corrected, which you negotiated with my father. I assume you recall the terms. His eyes narrowed. For the first time, he actually looked at her, not past her shoulder or at the middle distance, but directly at her face. You're unhappy, he said. It wasn't a question, wasn't even particularly sympathetic, just an observation. I'm functional, Evelyn replied. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Silence stretched between them. Outside, a carriage rattled past. Somewhere in the house, someone dropped something that shattered. I didn't want this either, Blackthorne said finally. The marriage. It was necessary. Necessary for whom? Your father owed debts. I needed... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. It resolved multiple complications. How efficient. His mouth tightened. I won't apologize for practicality. I'm not asking you to. Evelyn stood, met his eyes. I'm simply suggesting that if you're going to trap someone in a cage, you shouldn't be surprised when they rattle the bars. She watched that land, watched him process it. His face remained impassive, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation, reassessment. I'll be in Cornwall another 3 months, he said. After that, London for the season. We'll be expected to appear together at events. Of course, appearances matter. They do. Then I'll perform appropriately, as agreed. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and final. 2:00 tomorrow. Mrs. Hewitt will review household requirements with you. Any questions can be directed to my solicitor. Not to you? I'm occupied. Naturally. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The interviews. Who were they? Evelyn's pulse jumped. Potential staff. Mrs. Hewitt said you took extensive notes, didn't hire anyone. I was thorough. You were documenting something. She said nothing, just held his gaze. Finally, Blackthorne shook his head. Do what you want with your time. Just keep it away from my business. He left. Evelyn stood alone in the drawing room, listening to his footsteps fade, the front door close, the carriage pull away. Then she walked upstairs to her sitting room, unlocked her desk, and pulled out her maps. Keep it away from my business. He still didn't understand. This was her business now, and she was just getting started. The morning after Blackthorne's visit, Evelyn woke to screaming, not close, somewhere outside in the street beyond the garden walls. A woman's voice, raw and ragged, shouting words Evelyn couldn't make out. Then silence, the kind that felt worse than noise. She went to the window, saw nothing. The street below was empty, early morning fog still clinging to the cobblestones. But she'd heard it. Someone had needed help, and no one had come. Evelyn dressed quickly, skipped breakfast, and did something she hadn't done since arriving at Thornfield. She walked out the front door without telling anyone where she was going. The streets of Mayfair were waking up, servants scrubbing steps, delivery carts rattling past, the machinery of London's wealthy beginning its daily performance of refinement. But Evelyn turned away from the grand houses and headed toward the narrow lanes she'd only seen from her windows. 3 blocks from Thornfield, the world changed. The buildings pressed closer together. Laundry hung across alleys like desperate flags. The smell hit her. Unwashed bodies, rotting food, something chemical and wrong that burned her throat. Children sat on doorsteps, too thin, too quiet. A woman emptied a chamber pot from a second-story window without bothering to check if anyone was below. Evelyn had read about poverty, had seen illustrations in newspapers, but standing in it was different. A girl appeared in front of her, maybe 10 years old, barefoot despite the cold, holding a baby that was either sleeping or dead. Evelyn couldn't tell which. "Penny, miss." The girl's voice was flat. She'd asked this question 1,000 times and expected nothing. Evelyn reached for her purse, then stopped. Giving money would help for maybe a day. Then what? "What's your name?" she asked instead. The girl blinked. "Mary." "I'm Evelyn. Is that your sister?" "Brother, Tommy." Mary adjusted the baby, who stirred slightly. "Alive then. Mum's working. I watch him." "Where's your father?" "Dead. Factory accident," said with the same tone someone might use to describe weather. "Rain. Death. Equally inevitable." "How old are you?" 10, I think." She thought. Didn't know for certain. Evelyn knelt down, putting herself at eye level. The street filth soaked into her dress immediately, but she ignored it. "Mary, listen to me. There's a textile shop on Wardour Street. Mrs. Chen. She needs someone who can work a basic loom. Do you know how to weave?" Mary shook her head. "Can you learn?" A pause, then cautiously, "Maybe." "She'll teach you. Tell her Mrs. Blackthorne sent you. Can you remember that?" "Mrs. Blackthorne." "You're giving me a job?" Suspicion crept into Mary's voice. "What do I gotta do for it?" The question punched Evelyn in the chest. This child, this baby, had already learned that nothing came free. "Learn to weave," Evelyn said quietly. "Take care of your brother, that's all." Mary stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Then, slowly, she nodded. Evelyn gave her the address written on a scrap of paper and 2 shillings for immediate food. Then she stood and kept walking. By the time she returned to Thornfield 3 hours later, her dress was ruined, her shoes were caked in things she didn't want to identify, and she had 17 new names in her notebook. Mrs. Hewitt took one look at her and went pale. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I went for a walk." "In that?" The housekeeper gestured at Evelyn's destroyed clothing. "I'll need these cleaned, and I'll need a simpler dress for tomorrow. Something that won't stand out." "Stand out where?" Evelyn met her eyes. "Everywhere else." She went back the next day, and the day after that. Each time she went deeper into London's hidden architecture, the workhouses, the factories, the tenements where families of 8 lived in single rooms. She talked to women, listened to their stories, learned the truth that newspapers only hinted at. A widow whose husband died in the docks, crushed between 2 cargo shipments. The company paid nothing. She had 4 children and made matchboxes at home for 2 pennies per gross. Her fingers bled constantly from the chemicals. A girl of 16 who'd been fired from a factory for getting pregnant, the foreman's baby. Now she lived in a doorway and sold what was left of herself to survive. A woman who'd worked in a laundry for 12 years. The steam had destroyed her lungs. She coughed blood into rags and kept working because stopping meant starving. Evelyn documented everything, not with pity. Pity was useless. With precision, names, situations, skills, who needed work, who needed shelter, who needed medicine. And slowly she began to see the pattern. These weren't isolated tragedies. They were manufactured ones. The factory owners who paid starvation wages because they could. The landlords who crammed families into death traps and charged premium rent. The workhouses that broke people for the crime of being poor. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. Said, "You're being reckless." Evelyn looked up from her desk. Mrs. Hewitt stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression thunderous. "I'm being useful. You're wandering the worst parts of London unescorted. Do you have any idea what could happen?" "I have 17 ideas," Evelyn said. "I've met women it's happened to." "Then you should know better." "I do know better. That's why I'm going." Mrs. Hewitt stepped into the room and closed the door. "What are you trying to accomplish? You're one woman. You can't fix this." "I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to understand it." "Why?" "Good question." Evelyn set down her pen. "Because I was sold to settle my father's debts. Because I sat in this house for a month feeling sorry for myself while women were dying in the streets. Because if I'm trapped here anyway, I might as well do something that matters." The housekeeper's expression shifted, not softened. Mrs. Hewitt didn't soften, but something changed behind her eyes. "The Duke won't approve." "The Duke isn't here." "He will be, eventually." "Then I'll worry about it eventually." Evelyn picked up her pen again. "Is there something else?" Mrs. Hewitt watched her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "There's a woman, Catherine Mills. She worked in the Thornfield kitchens 15 years ago. Before your time. Before my time, even." Evelyn waited. "She was dismissed, got pregnant. The butler's doing, though he denied it." Mrs. Hewitt's voice went flat. "Last I heard, she was in St. Giles, working a tavern. You want me to find her? I want you to know that what you're doing matters, even if it's small, even if it's just one person." The housekeeper's jaw tightened. She had a daughter, would be 14 now. Evelyn wrote down the name. "I'll find them." After Mrs. Hewitt left, Evelyn sat staring at her notes. St. Giles, the worst rookery in London, where even the police didn't go unless they traveled in groups. She'd need to be careful. She went anyway. St. Giles was worse than anything she'd seen. The buildings leaned against each other like drunks, held up by rot and desperation. Raw sewage ran in the gutters. The air itself felt diseased, and the people, they looked at her like she was food. Evelyn kept her eyes forward and walked like she knew where she was going. Confidence, she'd learned, was armor. If you acted like you belonged, people hesitated just long enough for you to pass. The tavern was called the Broken Crown, which felt appropriate. Inside it was dark, smoke-filled, and packed with men who went silent when she entered. The woman behind the bar looked up. 40, maybe. Hard-lived. She saw Evelyn's dress, simple but still too nice for this place, and her expression shuddered. "We don't serve ladies. I'm looking for Catherine Mills." Silence. Every man in that room was suddenly very interested in his drink. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Someone who worked in Thornfield House, a long time ago." Evelyn kept her voice level. "A friend sent me." Catherine, because it had to be Catherine, studied her for a long, dangerous moment, then jerked her head toward a back room. 5 minutes, then you leave." The back room was barely more than a closet. Catherine closed the door and turned on her with an expression that could cut glass. "What do you want?" "I want to help." "Help!" Catherine laughed, harsh and broken. "You're 15 years late for help, sweetheart." "I know. I'm sorry." "Your sorry's worth shit." "You're right." Evelyn pulled out her notebook. "But I have connections, jobs, a doctor who doesn't charge. If you or your daughter need anything, my daughter's dead." The words hit like a fist. "Last year," Catherine continued, voice flat as stone. "Typhoid. Couldn't afford medicine. She was 13. Evelyn's throat closed. "I'm so sorry." "I told you, your sorry's worth shit." Catherine's hands were shaking. "You know what would have helped? 15 years ago, when that bastard butler threw me out. When I was pregnant and terrified and had nowhere to go. That's when I needed help. I wasn't there 15 years ago. Then why are you here now?" "Because I can't fix the past. But maybe I can do something about the present." Catherine stared at her, then, very quietly, "You married into Thornfield." "Yes." "You're the new Duchess." "Yes." "And you came here, to this shithole, looking for me." "Mrs. Hewitt told me your story. I wanted to find you myself." "Why?" Evelyn took a breath. "Because I need to understand what this city does to women, so I can figure out how to fight it." The silence stretched. Outside, someone was singing, drunk, off-key, desperately sad. "You can't fight this," Catherine said finally. "It's too big, too old. Men built this system, and they'll protect it." "Probably." "Then what's the point?" "The point is trying anyway." Catherine's expression cracked, just slightly. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Can it be both?" A snort that might have been a laugh. Catherine moved to the door, then paused. "There's a man, Lord Carrington Vale, owns half the factories in East London, pays the worst wages, has the worst conditions, girls die in his mills, and he just hires more." "I've heard the name." "He's the one you should be watching. Men like him, they're the real disease. The system's just the symptom." Evelyn wrote it down. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just do something with it." Catherine opened the door. "And don't come back here. These streets will eat you alive." "What?" Evelyn started researching Lord Carrington Vale that night. What she found made her blood run cold. He wasn't just a factory owner. He was a spider at the center of a massive web: textiles, shipping, property. He owned the factories where women worked, the tenements where they lived, the shops where they bought food at inflated prices. He'd built a closed system that extracted every possible penny from the poorest people in London, then funneled it all upward into his own pockets. And he was protected. Member of Parliament. Connected to half the nobility in England. Donations to the right charities bought him respectability. A beautiful wife and 3 perfect children provided cover. On paper, he was a pillar of society. In reality, he was a parasite. Evelyn spent 3 days mapping his business network. The factories, the properties, the connections. She found the names of foremen who did his dirty work, landlords who enforced his rents, politicians who blocked reform legislation that might hurt his profits. It was massive, intricate, designed to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. But Evelyn was looking, and she was starting to see the weak points. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Expensive paper, Vale's seal, hand-delivered by a liveried servant who waited for a response. Evelyn opened it in her sitting room, Mrs. Hewitt hovering nearby like a worried hen. "Mrs. Blackthorne, It has come to my attention that you have been making inquiries into my business interests. I'm certain this is merely curiosity, a young woman seeking to understand her new city. I would be delighted to host you for tea this Saturday at 2 o'clock. I believe we have much to discuss. Respectfully, Lord Carrington Vale. The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was still a threat. He knew she'd been asking questions, which meant he had people watching her, reporting back. She'd been naive to think she could investigate a man like Vale without him noticing. Ma'am? Mrs. Hewitt's voice was tight with worry. What does he want? To intimidate me. Will you go? Evelyn read the letter again. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to stay behind her walls where it was safe. But safe meant invisible, and she was done being invisible. Yes, she said. I'll go. That's dangerous. Everything's dangerous. The servant was still waiting. Evelyn scribbled a brief acceptance and sent him away. Then she sat down and tried to stop her hands from shaking. Vale knew about her, which meant he'd been watching, which meant her network, small and fragile as it was exposed. The women she'd helped could be in danger, and it was her fault for being careless. She spent the next 2 days preparing, not by picking out dresses or practicing polite conversation, by gathering information. She sent careful messages through her network, warning the women to be cautious. She documented everything she'd learned about Vale in duplicate and hid one copy in the library, another with Mrs. Hewitt. If something happened to her, the information wouldn't disappear. Saturday arrived too quickly. Vale's house was in Belgravia, massive, pristine, the kind of wealth that whispered instead of shouted. Evelyn was shown into a drawing room that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Lord Carrington Vale rose to greet her, 50-ish, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that came from good breeding and better tailors. His smile was warm. His eyes were not. Mrs. Blackthorne, how delightful. He took her hand and kissed it. His lips were cold. Please, sit. Tea? Thank you. They performed the ritual, pouring, stirring, small talk about weather and London's season. Vale's wife drifted through briefly, a pale, nervous woman who smiled too much, then vanished like smoke. When they were alone, Vale's expression shifted. I understand you've been exploring our fair city. Admirable curiosity for a newcomer. London is full of interesting things. Indeed, though some areas are perhaps less suitable for a lady of your standing. He sipped his tea. St. Giles, for instance. There it was, the threat made explicit. Evelyn kept her voice steady. I wasn't aware certain neighborhoods were restricted. Not restricted. Simply inadvisable. A woman of your position wandering such places attracts attention, the wrong kind of attention. From whom? From people who might misunderstand your intentions, who might think you're meddling in affairs that don't concern you. And which affairs would those be? Vale set down his cup. The pretense of politeness evaporated. Mrs. Blackthorne, let me be direct. I've built my businesses through hard work and legitimate enterprise. I provide employment to hundreds of workers. I contribute to this city's prosperity. At what cost? I beg your pardon? The women in your factories, the ones working 16-hour days for pennies, the families crammed into your tenements, the children dying of preventable diseases because they can't afford doctors. Evelyn met his eyes. What cost to them? Silence. Vale's expression hardened. You're naive. Those people would have nothing without my factories. I give them opportunity. You give them exploitation dressed up as opportunity. Careful, Mrs. Blackthorne. Or what? You'll have me followed? Threaten me? Write concerned letters to my husband? She leaned forward. I'm already trapped in a marriage I didn't choose, living in a house that feels like a mausoleum. What exactly do you think you can do to me that's worse than my current situation? Vale stood. His face was red, jaw tight. Your husband is a reasonable man, a businessman. I'm certain when I explain that his wife is damaging her reputation and his by association with rabble-rousers and troublemakers, he'll intervene. My husband doesn't care what I do. Then perhaps I'll give him reason to care. Evelyn stood as well. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. Do what you need to do, Lord Vale, but understand this. I'm not stopping. I've seen what your legitimate enterprise does to people, and I'm going to make sure everyone else sees it too. She turned to leave. Mrs. Blackthorne. She paused. Vale's voice was soft now, dangerous. You have no idea what you're playing with. The system you're trying to fight, it's supported by the most powerful people in England. You're one woman, a nobody, the daughter of a ruined gentleman, married to a duke who doesn't even like you enough to live in the same house. The words landed like bullets. You can't win this, Vale continued. You can only get hurt, or worse, you'll get the people you're trying to help hurt. Is that what you want? Those women you've been helping. How do you think their employers will react when they learn those women are connected to a troublemaker? Evelyn's blood went cold. He was right. She'd been so focused on helping that she hadn't considered the consequences. If Vale targeted the women in her network, if he had them fired or evicted, leave them alone, she said quietly. That depends entirely on you. Walk away from this foolish crusade. Go back to your house. Be a proper duchess. And I'll forget this conversation ever happened. And if I don't? Vale smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Then we'll see just how much damage one woman can survive. Evelyn made it to her carriage before she started shaking. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that. From rage. Pure, crystalline rage at this man who'd built an empire on suffering and had the audacity to threaten her for noticing. The driver took her back to Thornfield. She went straight to her sitting room, locked the door, and pulled out her maps. Vale was right about one thing. She couldn't fight him alone. She needed allies, resources, protection for the women in her network. The thought stopped her cold. She needed her husband. Alistair Blackthorne had money, influence, connections that could shield her network from Vale's retaliation. He was a duke. Vale was just a lord. In the hierarchy that still mattered in England, Blackthorne outranked him. But asking for help meant admitting what she'd been doing, meant exposing her network, meant trusting a man who'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. Evelyn stared at the letter she'd started writing and didn't finish. Dear Alistair, I need your help. 3 days ago, she'd sworn she'd never ask him for anything, but 3 days ago, she hadn't made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in London. She sent the letter that night. Not to Cornwall. Blackthorne was back in London, at his city apartments. The messenger returned 2 hours later with a response written in Blackthorne's harsh, precise handwriting. Monday. My apartments, 10 o'clock. No, dear Evelyn. No questions about what she needed, just a time and place. Evelyn spent Sunday preparing her argument. She rehearsed what she'd say, how she'd explain. She practiced keeping her voice steady, her case logical. Monday morning, she dressed in her plainest dress and took a carriage to Blackthorne's apartments in St. James. They were exactly what she'd expected. Expensive, cold, decorated like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. A butler showed her to a study where Blackthorne sat behind a desk, reading correspondence. He didn't look up when she entered. Close the door. Evelyn did. Then stood there, waiting. Finally, he set down his papers and looked at her. His expression was unreadable. You've been busy. Not a question. He knew. Of course he knew. He probably had reports about her activities, about St. Giles, about Vale. Yes, she said. Why? Because I could. Because no one was stopping me. Because... She stopped, started over. Because sitting in that house doing nothing was killing me. Blackthorne studied her for a long moment. Lord Carrington Vale sent me a letter, expressing concern about my wife's erratic behavior. He suggested you were suffering from some kind of female hysteria. I'm not hysterical. I know, that's not what concerns me. He stood, walked to the window. What concerns me is that you've made an enemy of a man with significant political power, a man who can make your life, and mine, extremely difficult. I didn't mean to. You went to St. Giles alone. You investigated his business interests. You confronted him in his own house. Blackthorne turned to face her. Those aren't accidents. Those are choices. Evelyn's throat tightened. I know. Then what did you think would happen? I thought... She stopped. What had she thought? That she could help a few women and no one would notice? That the system would just let her tinker with it? I thought I could do something that mattered without consequence. I was wrong. Silence. Blackthorn walked back to his desk, picked up another letter. Vale also sent this. A list of women he claims are associated with you. He's threatening to have them dismissed from their employment, evicted from their housing. Evelyn's heart dropped. He can't. He can. And he will, unless you stop. Then I'll stop. Will you? She met his eyes. If it protects them, yes. Blackthorn set down the letter. For the first time since she'd known him, his expression shifted into something almost like respect. That's the right answer, he said quietly, but it's also the wrong solution. What do you mean? Vale assumes I'll force you to comply, that I'll bring you to heel like a disobedient wife. Blackthorn's mouth tightened. He made a miscalculation. Evelyn's pulse kicked. Which is? He assumed I married you because I needed a decorative wife, someone to manage my household and appear at social functions. Blackthorn picked up Vale's letter and very deliberately tore it in half. But I married you because you were the daughter of a man who owed me a debt, which means this marriage is already a transaction, and I don't let people threaten my transactions. I don't understand. Vale is trying to use you to manipulate me. That's unacceptable. He dropped the torn letter into a wastebasket. So I'm going to help you. Evelyn stared at him. Why? Because it's strategically sound. Vale has been blocking legislation I support. He's aligned with people who oppose my interests. If you found a way to damage him, I want to know about it. This isn't about strategy for me. It's about people. I know. That's what makes it effective. Blackthorn returned to his desk. Show me what you have. And there, in that cold study, Evelyn pulled out her maps and notebooks and showed her husband the network she'd built from nothing. He listened, asked sharp questions, took notes. When she finished, he sat back and looked at her with something that might have been surprise. This is good work, he said. Thorough. Strategic. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. No more wandering dangerous neighborhoods alone. No more confronting powerful men without backup. Then what? Blackthorn smiled. It was cold and sharp and absolutely terrifying. Then we destroy him. The plan began with silence. For 2 weeks after their meeting, Blackthorn did nothing visible. No confrontations, no public statements. He attended Parliament, managed his estates, appeared at precisely 3 social functions with Evelyn at his side. Stiff, formal, playing the role of distant spouses to perfection. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But in Blackthorn's study, behind locked doors, they were building a weapon. Vale's factories operate on paper-thin margins, Blackthorn said, spreading documents across his desk. He undercuts competitors by paying starvation wages. If those wages increase even slightly, his entire system collapses. Evelyn studied the ledgers he'd obtained. She didn't ask how. So we force him to raise wages. We create conditions where he has no choice. Blackthorn tapped a finger on one document. He has contracts with 3 major retailers. If those contracts terminate simultaneously, he'll be desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. The retailers won't drop him without reason. Then we give them reason. He pulled out another stack of papers. I have friends who sit on their boards, friends who owe me favors. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. His face was still cold, still distant, but there was something underneath now. Focus, purpose. She'd thought he didn't care about anything except his ledgers and his empty houses. She'd been wrong. He cared about winning. This will take months, she said. Yes. Vale will retaliate. Almost certainly. The women in my network are already being protected. I've had my solicitors quietly threaten lawsuits against any landlord who evicts them without cause. It won't stop Vale entirely, but it will slow him down. Evelyn's throat tightened. Thank you. Blackthorn didn't look up from his papers. Don't thank me. This is strategy, not charity. Vale threatened what's mine. I'm responding appropriately. What's mine? He meant her, the marriage, the transaction. It shouldn't have stung, but it did. Right, she said. Strategy. This time he did look up. His eyes were unreadable. Did you expect something else? No, I know what this is. Do you? The question hung between them. Outside, a carriage rattled past. Someone was shouting about fresh fish, London's daily chaos pressing against the windows. We should focus on the work, Evelyn said finally. Something flickered across Blackthorn's face. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. Agreed. They worked until midnight. When Evelyn finally returned to Thornfield, her head ached and her eyes burned, but for the first time since her wedding, she felt something like hope. Small, fragile, dangerous, but hope nonetheless. Vale struck first. The message came through Mary, the girl Evelyn had helped months ago, now working steadily at Mrs. Chen's textile shop. She arrived at Thornfield's servant's entrance, breathless and terrified. Your Grace, Mary could barely get the words out. Mrs. Chen's shop. Men came, said the building's unsafe, condemned it. She has 3 days to clear out. Evelyn's blood went cold. When? This morning. She's losing everything. Mrs. Hewitt appeared, took one look at Mary's face, and immediately ushered her to the kitchen for food. Evelyn went straight to her sitting room and sent an urgent message to Blackthorn. He arrived within the hour. It started, Evelyn said, showing him Mary's report. Vale's retaliating. Blackthorn read it, his expression darkening. The building inspector is in Vale's pocket, has been for years. Can we stop it? Not legally. The condemnation will stand. Then illegally? He looked at her sharply. Excuse me? You heard me. If we can't stop it through proper channels, what other options do we have? Blackthorn set down the paper. You're asking me to break the law. I'm asking you to help someone who's being destroyed for the crime of helping me. Evelyn's hands were shaking. Mrs. Chen did nothing wrong. She gave a desperate girl a job, and now she's being punished for it. Welcome to how power works. I know how it works. I'm asking if you're willing to work around it. Silence. Blackthorn stood, walked to the window, stared out at the garden. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. If I do this, if I intervene in ways that are questionable, it sets a precedent. It means every future battle will be fought in the shadows. As opposed to the current system, which is so transparent and fair. Point taken. He turned back to her. But understand the risks. If we're caught manipulating inspectors or falsifying documents, the scandal will destroy both of us. You'll be seen as a criminal. I'll lose my seat in Parliament. And if we do nothing, Mrs. Chen loses her livelihood. Other women in the network will be next. Yes. Then we don't have a choice. Blackthorn studied her for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he nodded. I'll handle it. But from now on, we operate under the assumption that Vale is watching everything. No more messages through the regular post. No more public meetings. Everything goes through intermediaries. Agreed. And Evelyn? He paused at the door. This is the point where we cross a line. Once we start, there's no going back. I crossed that line the day I walked into St. Giles. You're just catching up. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. Within 48 hours, the condemnation order mysteriously vanished from official records. The building inspector received an anonymous package containing detailed documentation of every bribe he'd ever taken, along with a note suggesting he might want to reconsider his recent decisions. Mrs. Chen's shop stayed open. But Vale's message was clear. He could hurt anyone connected to Evelyn, anytime he wanted. The attacks continued. A landlord doubled the rent on a tenement where 3 of Evelyn's network members lived. A factory foreman fired 2 women for insubordination. Their crime was knowing Evelyn's name. A shop owner who'd been hiring women Evelyn recommended suddenly announced he was closing, citing economic concerns. Each attack was small, targeted, designed to erode the network one connection at a time. Evelyn documented everything, shared it with Blackthorn. Together, they countered where they could. Legal threats, financial pressure, quiet conversations with people who owed Blackthorn favors. But it wasn't enough. We're playing defense, Evelyn said one night, frustration bleeding through her voice. Every time we stop one attack, he launches 2 more. We need to hit him directly. Blackthorn was reviewing financial documents, his face illuminated by lamplight. We are hitting him. The retail contracts are fracturing. He's losing money. Not fast enough. Women are suffering while we wait for your strategy to work. Strategy takes time. They don't have time. Her voice echoed in the study. Blackthorn looked up, his expression unreadable. I know that frustrates you, he said quietly, but if we move too quickly, we expose ourselves. Vale is looking for any excuse to destroy you publicly. One misstep, and he'll bury you in scandal. He's already destroying women publicly. At least if he targets me, I can fight back. Can you? Blackthorn set down his papers. You're a woman, a duchess with no independent wealth, no title of your own, no legal standing beyond what I provide. If Vale decides to crush you, he has a dozen ways to do it. Accusations of impropriety, suggestions of mental instability, rumors about your behavior in places a lady shouldn't go. So I should just hide? I'm saying you should be smart about when and how you fight. Evelyn stood pacing. I hate this. I hate that we have to play these games while people suffer. I know. Do you? She turned on him. Do you actually care about any of this? Or is it just another move in your endless strategy game? The question came out harsher than she'd intended. Blackthorn's face went very still. You think I don't care. I think you care about winning. There's a difference. Perhaps. He stood as well, and suddenly the room felt very small. But unlike you, I understand that losing means those women suffer more. Your passion is admirable. Your recklessness is dangerous. At least I have passion. And I have resources. Which do you think will actually change things? They stared at each other across the desk. Evelyn's heart was hammering. She wanted to throw something, scream, storm out. Instead, she took a breath. Both, she said quietly. We need both. Blackthorn's expression shifted. Agreed. The tension didn't break, but it changed, became something else. Something neither of them seemed to know what to do with. It's late, Blackthorn said finally. You should go home. Home. Thornfield. The house that still didn't feel like hers. Will you be there? The question slipped out before she could stop it. No, I have meetings tomorrow in the city. Of course you do. She turned to leave, then paused. Alistair? He looked up. She'd never used his given name before. Thank you for helping, even if it's just strategy. His face was unreadable. Get some sleep, Evelyn. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A man appeared at Thornfield's servants' entrance late one evening, middle-aged, well-dressed, nervous. He carried a leather portfolio and refused to give his name. I need to speak with Mrs. Blackthorn. It's urgent. Mrs. Hewitt, ever cautious, sent for Evelyn rather than turning him away. I'm Mrs. Blackthorn, Evelyn said, studying him. Who are you? Someone who worked for Lord Vale, until today. He thrust the portfolio at her. These are his private financial records, manufacturing costs, actual wages paid versus what he reports to the tax authorities, bribes to building inspectors, everything. Evelyn's pulse spiked. Why are you giving me this? Because my daughter worked in one of his mills. She died 3 months ago. Machinery accident. Vale paid the foreman to report it as her fault. The man's voice cracked. He paid £5 to cover up my daughter's death. £5. I'm so sorry. I don't want your sorry. I want him destroyed. He tapped the portfolio. This will do it. But it has to come from someone he can't touch, someone with power. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. There's more. Vale is planning something. I don't know details, but I heard him talking with his solicitor. Something about your husband, about forcing him to act. Ice spread through Evelyn's veins. What kind of forcing? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's happening soon. After he left, Evelyn opened the portfolio. What she found was explosive, documented proof of everything Vale had done. Tax fraud, bribery, falsified safety reports, death after death, covered up or dismissed. This was it, the weapon they needed. But the warning about Alistair gnawed at her. She sent word to his apartments immediately. No response. Sent another message. Nothing. Finally, at midnight, she did something she'd never done. She went to his apartments uninvited. The butler tried to stop her. His Grace is not receiving. I don't care. Where is he? Madam, I cannot. Tell me where he is, or I will tear this apartment apart looking for him. Something in her voice must have convinced him. His study. But he gave strict orders. Evelyn was already moving. She found Blackthorne at his desk, surrounded by papers, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. Evelyn, what are you? Vale is planning something. Something that targets you specifically. She set the portfolio on his desk. And I have evidence that will destroy him, but we need to move now. Blackthorne opened the portfolio. His face went very still as he read. Where did you get this? A former employee. His daughter died in Vale's mill. This is... He stopped. Started again. This is enough to bring criminal charges. Fraud. Negligent homicide. If we present this to the right authorities, Vale knows we're coming for him. He's planning a counterstrike. Then we move faster than he expects. Blackthorne stood, energy suddenly flooding back into his posture. I have contacts at the Times. If we leak this to them tomorrow, it'll be front-page news by the weekend. Vale won't be able to suppress it. What about his warning? The threat against you? Doesn't matter. Once this is public, his political protection evaporates. He'll be too busy defending himself to attack anyone. Evelyn wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that exposing Vale would be enough. But something felt wrong. What if he moves first? She asked. With what? We have his records, his crimes documented. With whatever he was planning, the thing the employee warned about. Blackthorne's jaw tightened. Then we deal with it. Together. The word hit her unexpectedly. Together. Not her alone or him alone. Together. Okay, she said. Let's finish this. The article ran 3 days later. Front page of the Times, devastating in its precision. Every crime documented, every death named. The byline didn't mention Evelyn or Blackthorne, but anyone paying attention would know where the information came from. London exploded. Parliament demanded investigations. Competitors sensed blood in the water and moved to claim Vale's contracts. Workers in his factories began organizing, emboldened by the public outcry. For 48 hours, it looked like they'd won. Then Vale struck back. The counter-article appeared in 3 different newspapers simultaneously. Not refuting the charges. That would have been impossible. Instead, it attacked the source. The headline made Evelyn's stomach turn. Duchess's dangerous delusion. Lady Blackthorne's unnatural obsession with the poor raises questions about her mental state. The article was surgical in its cruelty. It questioned why a duchess would concern herself with factory workers, suggested she was suffering from hysteria brought on by her unfortunate marriage circumstances, implied that her husband had distanced himself because of her erratic behavior. It painted her as either insane or scheming, either way, untrustworthy. And it worked. By the next morning, London society was buzzing, not about Vale's crimes, but about the strange duchess who'd betrayed her class. Invitations to social functions dried up. Women who'd been polite at parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Evelyn read the articles in Blackthorne's study, her hands shaking with rage. He's turning me into the villain. He's trying to discredit you so the evidence seems suspect. Blackthorne was already writing letters. It won't work. The documentation stands on its own. Does it? Or will people assume a hysterical woman fabricated it? The records are real, independently verifiable. And I'm a woman who stepped out of line. Which do you think London will believe? Blackthorne set down his pen. We knew there would be blowback. Did we? Did we really consider that he'd try to have me declared insane? Evelyn's voice cracked. Do you know what happens to women who are declared mentally unfit? They get locked away, institutionalized, silenced permanently. He can't do that. You're my wife. Any such action would require my consent. And if he convinces you I actually am unstable. The question hung in the air. Blackthorne stood, walked around the desk. For the first time, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. I know exactly how sane you are, he said quietly. I know because I've watched you build a network from nothing, because I've seen you face down threats that would terrify most men, because you're the only person in my life who's ever challenged me to be better than I am. Evelyn stared at him. His face was inches from hers, and for the first time his walls were down. She could see past the cold exterior to something raw underneath. Alistair. A crash from downstairs cut her off, shouting, the sound of breaking glass. Blackthorne pulled away, his hand going to the desk drawer where he kept a pistol. Stay here. Like hell. They went downstairs together. The front door had been smashed open. 3 men stood in the entrance hall, not thugs exactly, but close. Well-dressed violence wearing the thinnest veneer of respectability. The butler was on the floor, bleeding from a cut above his eye. Which of you is Mrs. Blackthorne? The lead man asked. Evelyn stepped forward before Alistair could stop her. I am. The man pulled out a document. By order of Lord Carrington Vale and the Court of Chancery, you are to be remanded for medical evaluation. Evidence suggests you are suffering from acute nervous disorder and pose a danger to yourself and others. That's insane. Precisely the point, ma'am. He moved toward her. Please come quietly. Blackthorne stepped between them, pistol now visible. Touch her, and you're dead. The man paused. Your Grace, this is a legal order. I don't care if it's signed by the Queen herself. You're not taking her. Then we'll add obstruction to the charges. Is that what you want? Your wife's madness dragging you down with her? Evelyn saw it then. The trap Vale had built. If Blackthorne defended her, he'd be painted as complicit in her madness. His reputation would be destroyed along with hers. If he let them take her, she'd disappear into an institution. Silenced forever. Either way, Vale won. Alistair, she said quietly, let them take me. Absolutely not. If you fight this, he destroys you too. Then no one can help those women. I'm not letting you rot in an asylum. Then find another way. But you can't do it while holding a gun on court officers. The lead man smiled. The lady is being reasonable, Your Grace. Perhaps you should listen. Blackthorne's face was white with fury. You have 24 hours. If she's not released by then, I will burn Vale's entire world to the ground. We'll note your objection in the report. 2 of the men moved forward. Evelyn didn't resist. She met Blackthorne's eyes one last time, saw the rage there, the desperation, the calculation already spinning behind his walls. Find me, she said. I will. They led her out into the London night, into a carriage with barred windows, into the trap Vale had designed specifically for women who refused to stay silent. And as the carriage pulled away, Evelyn looked back and saw Blackthorne standing in the doorway, still holding that pistol, his face a mask of cold fury. She'd been wrong about him. He didn't care just about winning, he cared about her. And now they were both going to pay the price. The asylum smelled like decay masquerading as medicine. Evelyn was taken through corridors lit by gas lamps that hissed and sputtered, past rooms where women moaned or wept or sat in terrible silence. The attendants, 2 large men who gripped her arms with unnecessary force, said nothing as they walked. Their faces were blank. They'd done this before. The room they locked her in was small. A bed bolted to the floor, a single window too high to reach, bars across it just in case, walls the color of old bones. The door slammed shut. A key turned, and Evelyn was alone. She allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of fear. Let it wash through her, the panic, the claustrophobia, the realization that Vale had actually done it. Then she pushed it down and started thinking. This wasn't a medical facility. This was a prison for inconvenient women, which meant it ran on different rules than legitimate hospitals. Rules that could be exploited if she was smart enough. The door opened again an hour later. A doctor entered, 50s, rotund, carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm Dr. Pemberton. I'll be overseeing your treatment. Treatment for what? He consulted his clipboard. Acute hysteria with delusional tendencies. Obsessive fixation on inappropriate subjects. Inability to conform to expected social behavior. I'm not hysterical, I'm angry. There's a difference. Your anger is precisely the symptom, I'm afraid. He made a note. Women of your station should maintain composure at all times. Your recent behavior suggests a fundamental imbalance. My recent behavior suggests I have a spine. Another note. Defensive, hostile, classic presentation. Evelyn realized the trap. Anything she said would be twisted into evidence of madness. Protest too much, she was agitated. Stay silent, she was withdrawn. There was no right answer because the diagnosis had been written before she arrived.
How long will I be here? She asked. That depends entirely on your progress. Some women recover quickly. Others, he shrugged. We've had patients here for years. Years. The word hung in the air like a noose. My husband will object. Your husband signed the commitment papers this morning. The lie was so smooth she almost believed it. But Evelyn had seen Blackthorn's face when they'd taken her, had heard his threat. He would never sign those papers.
Which meant Vale had forged them. I'd like to see the documents, she said calmly. That won't be necessary. I'm entitled to legal representation. In due time. First, we must stabilize your condition. Dr. Pemberton moved toward the door. Rest now. We'll begin treatment tomorrow. What kind of treatment? His smile made her skin crawl. Whatever proves necessary. But the first night was the worst. Evelyn lay on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of the asylum around her. Women crying. Someone screaming that she wasn't mad. Please believe her, she wasn't mad. The thud of attendants' boots in the corridor. She thought about Blackthorn standing in that doorway, pistol in hand. About the women in her network who'd trusted her. About Vale, probably celebrating his victory with expensive brandy. The rage helped, kept her focused. By morning, she had a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was something. When the attendant brought breakfast, thin gruel, stale bread, Evelyn was polite, compliant. She ate without complaint, thanked him softly. The first rule of surviving a trap: make your captors underestimate you. Dr. Pemberton arrived mid-morning for what he called an evaluation. More questions designed to manufacture evidence of madness. Why had she been spending time in poor neighborhoods? Why did she care about workers' conditions? Why couldn't she simply enjoy the privileges of her position? Evelyn answered carefully, not defensively, that would confirm his bias. Instead, she spoke about charity work, helping the less fortunate, all perfectly acceptable pursuits for a lady framed in terms he'd recognize. She watched his expression shift, confusion, doubt. She wasn't performing madness the way he expected. I may have been overzealous, she said quietly. My husband has been quite distant. Perhaps I was seeking purpose where I shouldn't have. The lie tasted like poison, but Dr. Pemberton's pen scratched eagerly across his notes. A very insightful observation, Mrs. Blackthorn. Many women struggle with the isolation of marriage. It's not uncommon for this to manifest in inappropriate fixations. I can see that now. Excellent. We may make faster progress than I anticipated. After he left, Evelyn allowed herself a thin smile. Step 1. Convince them she was treatable, docile, not worth the effort of holding long term. Step 2. Find a way to get a message out. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. One of the attendants, a young woman, maybe 20, exhausted looking, brought lunch. As she set down the tray, Evelyn noticed her hands were shaking. Are you all right? Evelyn asked, the girl startled. Patients aren't supposed to talk to staff. I won't tell anyone, you look unwell. A pause, then very quietly. My sister's sick. I've been working double shifts to pay for medicine. What's wrong with her? Consumption. She worked. In Lord Vale's mill. The air there, it destroys your lungs. The girl's voice cracked. I told her to quit, but she needed the money. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Vale's mill? Yes, ma'am. The attendant looked around nervously. I shouldn't be talking about this. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah, I need your help, and in return, I can help your sister. Sarah's eyes widened. How? You're a patient. I won't be forever, but I need to get a message to someone. My husband. Can you do that? They check all outgoing letters. Dr. Pemberton reads everything. Then it has to be verbal. A message you deliver in person. Evelyn leaned forward. I can pay you, and I know a doctor who treats consumption. He doesn't charge. But you have to get word to the Duke of Blackthorn. Tell him exactly where I am. Tell him... She paused. What message would Alistair understand? What couldn't be dismissed or intercepted? Tell him the accounts don't balance. Sarah frowned. That's it? He'll understand. It was a gamble, a huge one. Sarah could report the conversation to Dr. Pemberton, could take Evelyn's information and do nothing, could be too frightened to risk her job. But the girl's sister was dying in Vale's Mill, and Evelyn was betting that mattered more than fear. If I do this, Sarah said slowly, and they find out, I'll lose my position. If you don't do it, how long before your sister dies? Sarah's face crumpled. The doctor says weeks. Maybe. Then we don't have time to waste. The girl stood there for a long moment, weighing her options. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. I finish my shift at 6. I'll go tonight. After she left, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Now she just had to survive until Alistair got the message, and pray he understood what it meant. Dr. Pemberton returned that afternoon with new treatment. Laudanum mixed with something bitter. He insisted she drink it while he watched. This will help calm your mind, he said. Reduce the obsessive thoughts. Evelyn had no choice. She drank. The drug hit fast. The room tilted. Her thoughts went fuzzy, slipping away like water through her fingers. She tried to hold on to something, Alistair's face, the women she'd helped, her own name, but it all blurred together. When she woke, it was dark. Hours had passed. She was still in her room, but her clothes were different. Someone had changed her while she was unconscious. Rage cut through the lingering fog of the drug. They'd stripped her, drugged her into compliance, all perfectly legal under the guise of medical treatment. This was how they broke women. Not with violence, that left marks. With medicine, with authority, with the slow erosion of will disguised as care. Evelyn forced herself to stand. Her legs shook, but she stayed upright. They could drug her body. They couldn't drug her mind. Not completely. 3 days passed. Dr. Pemberton continued his treatments. More laudanum. Questions designed to break her down. Suggestions that accepting her condition would make everything easier. Evelyn played along, agreed with his assessments, spoke about being grateful for his help. All while tracking the patterns of the asylum, when attendants changed shifts, which doors were locked when, where the gaps in observation existed. Sarah returned twice with food, but said nothing. Evelyn couldn't tell if the girl had delivered the message or lost her nerve. On the 4th day, something changed. Evelyn woke to shouting in the corridor. Not patients, staff. Angry, frightened voices overlapping. Then the door to her room flew open. Alistair stood there, looking like he'd torn through hell to get to her. His coat was disheveled. His face was white with fury. Behind him stood 3 men. His solicitor and 2 others Evelyn didn't recognize. Get her out of here, Blackthorn said. An attendant tried to block him. You can't remove a patient without... Blackthorn grabbed the man by his collar and slammed him against the wall. She is not a patient. The commitment papers are forged. I never signed them. My solicitor has the originals, and they're nothing like what you were given. He released the attendant and moved to Evelyn. Can you walk? She nodded, though her legs still felt unsteady from the drugs. Blackthorn's jaw tightened when he saw her condition. What did they give you? Laudanum. Something else. I don't know. He turned to his solicitor. Document everything. Every dose. Every treatment. I want charges filed against Pemberton and whoever else was involved. They made it to the main entrance before Dr. Pemberton appeared, flanked by 2 orderlies. Your Grace, you're making a terrible mistake. Your wife is clearly unwell. My wife was kidnapped and drugged. That's not treatment. That's imprisonment. The court order was obtained through fraud. Lord Carrington Vale forged my signature on the commitment papers. He's currently being questioned by the authorities about that, along with approximately 15 other crimes. Blackthorn's voice could have frozen fire. You accepted a patient based on fraudulent documents and administered drugs without proper consent. I'd suggest you find a very good solicitor. Pemberton's face went gray. They stepped out into daylight. The sun was too bright. Evelyn's eyes watered, but she didn't care. She was out. A carriage waited. Blackthorn helped her inside, then climbed in after her. "How did you find me?" she asked as they pulled away. "A girl named Sarah showed up at my apartments, delivered your message." He was watching her carefully, like she might shatter. "The accounts don't balance. Clever. I wasn't sure you'd understand." "Well, I always understand when something doesn't add up." He paused. "Are you hurt?" "Drugged, angry, but not hurt. I'm going to destroy him, Vale, Pemberton, everyone involved." "I know." The carriage rattled through London streets. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the motion ground her. She was out, she was safe. But they weren't done yet. "What happened while I was inside?" she asked. Blackthorn's expression shifted. "Everything. The evidence we published. It sparked investigations, factory inspections, financial audits. Vale's trying to contain it, but it's spreading faster than he can manage." "That's good. It gets better. The women in your network, they didn't stay quiet. When word spread that you'd been committed, they organized, marched on Parliament, demanded your release." He shook his head slightly, something almost like wonder in his voice. 30 women became 300, then 1,000. They shut down 2 of Vale's factories by refusing to work. They made so much noise that the newspapers couldn't ignore it. Evelyn stared at him. "They did that? For me?" "For themselves. You just showed them it was possible." He met her eyes. "You built something, Evelyn. Something that doesn't need you to survive. That's more than most people accomplish in a lifetime." The words settled over her like a weight and a gift simultaneously. "What about Vale?" she asked. "Cornered, desperate, which makes him dangerous." Blackthorn's jaw tightened. "He's planning something. I don't know what yet, but..." The carriage lurched violently to a stop. Evelyn heard shouting outside. The driver's voice, sharp with alarm. Then the door was yanked open. A man stood there, well-dressed, middle-aged. Behind him, 6 others, hired muscle barely disguised as gentlemen. Lord Carrington Vale smiled at them both. "Your Grace, how convenient. I was hoping to catch you together." Blackthorn moved in front of Evelyn. "Get out of the way." "I'm afraid I can't do that. You've caused me considerable trouble, both of you. I think it's time we resolved this matter. Permanently." The threat was explicit. Evelyn felt Blackthorn tense. "You're going to murder a duke in broad daylight?" Blackthorn asked. "Even you aren't that stupid." "Murder? No. An unfortunate carriage accident." Vale gestured and his men moved closer. "These streets are so dangerous. Anything can happen." Evelyn's mind raced. They were surrounded. Outnumbered, even if Blackthorn had his pistol. But then she heard it. A sound growing louder. Footsteps. Voices. Many of them. Vale heard it too. His smile faltered. Around the corner came a crowd. Not a mob. Organized. Purposeful. At the front, Mary, the girl Evelyn had helped months ago. Catherine from the tavern. Sarah, the attendant who delivered the message. Behind them, dozens more. Women from factories. From tenements. From the network Evelyn had built. And behind them, surprisingly, men. Workers, shopkeepers, people who'd been watching, waiting, finally deciding which side they were on. Mary stepped forward. She was carrying a newspaper, the latest edition. The headline screamed, "Vale Industries under criminal investigation, multiple charges filed including fraud, bribery, and negligent homicide." "We heard you might need help, Your Grace," Mary said to Evelyn. Then to Vale, "You should leave. Now." Vale's face went purple. "You're threatening me? You're nothing. Workers. Peasants? We're witnesses," Catherine cut in. "To what you just threatened. To what you've done. And there's about 200 of us here, all ready to testify." More people were arriving, the crowd was growing, and in the distance, Evelyn could hear whistles, police finally responding. Vale looked at his men, looked at the crowd, did the math. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and for the first time in his life, his money and connections couldn't save him. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice shook. "Yes, it is," Blackthorn replied. "You're done." Vale backed away. His men followed. They disappeared into the crowd, which parted just enough to let them through, then closed ranks again. The police arrived minutes later. Blackthorn gave a statement. So did Evelyn. So did a dozen witnesses who'd seen Vale threaten them. By sunset, Lord Carrington Vale was in custody. They returned to Thornfield as the sun set. Evelyn felt like she'd been away for years, not days. Mrs. Hewitt met them at the door. She took one look at Evelyn and her expression cracked, just for a moment, into something like relief. "Welcome home, ma'am." Home. The word still felt strange, but less strange than before. Blackthorn followed Evelyn to her sitting room. She expected him to leave, to retreat to his own space, his own world. He'd done what was necessary, rescued her, defeated Vale. Their transaction was complete, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the garden. "They came for you," he said quietly. "Those women. They risked everything. They came for themselves. I just happened to be the catalyst. Don't diminish it. What you built, it matters." Evelyn sat down, exhaustion finally catching up with her. What happens now? Vale will face trial. The evidence is overwhelming. His political allies are distancing themselves. His factories are hemorrhaging contracts. Blackthorn turned to face her. He'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. And the women? The workers? The factories that don't close will have to reform. New legislation is already being drafted. Workplace safety, minimum wages, restrictions on child labor. It won't fix everything, but it's a start. Because we forced them to pay attention. Yes. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just present. "I owe you an apology," Blackthorn said finally. Evelyn looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For treating our marriage like a business transaction. For being absent. For—" He stopped, searching for words. "For not seeing you until you'd already built an entire revolution without me. You helped when it mattered. I should have helped from the beginning. Should have been the kind of husband who didn't make you feel trapped." He moved closer, sat in the chair across from her. "I married you to settle a debt and expected you to fade into the background. That was unfair, cruel actually. You were honest about what you wanted. That's more than most men offer. I was a coward. I'd convinced myself that keeping distance was safer, that not caring meant not getting hurt." His voice dropped. "But watching them take you, realizing I might lose you, Alistair." He met her eyes. For the first time since she'd known him, she saw past all his walls, saw the person underneath the Duke, the businessman, the cold facade, saw someone who was terrified of connection and fighting for it anyway. "I don't know how to do this, Wyatt," he said. "How to be someone's partner instead of just their obligation, but I'd like to try, if you'll let me." Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd spent months believing he didn't care, that she was alone in this marriage. She'd been wrong. "I'd like that," she said quietly. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. "No more separate wings," he said. "No more city apartments while you stay here. If we're doing this marriage, this partnership, we do it properly. That's a significant change. I'm aware. What about your carefully constructed life, your order and predictability?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You destroyed that the day you walked into St. Giles. I'm just finally catching up." Evelyn laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. Outside, London was settling into evening. The city that had tried to erase her, had trapped her, had underestimated her. She'd fought it, and she'd won. Not completely. There was still so much work to do. So many women who needed help. So many systems that needed to change. But she'd proven something vital. That one woman, armed with intelligence and courage, and an absolute refusal to be silent, could shake the foundations of power. The network she'd built would continue, would grow, would become something larger than her, and now, for the first time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. Blackthorn's hand tightened on hers. "What are you thinking? That we have a lot of work ahead of us?" "Yes." "That Vale's arrest is just the beginning?" "Agreed." "And that I'm going to need your help. All of it. Not just your money or your title, but you." He nodded slowly. You have it. All of it.
Evelyn looked at the man who'd been a stranger, who'd become an ally, who was becoming, slowly and imperfectly, something more. Then let's finish what we started, she said. Together? Together. Outside, the first stars were appearing over London, a city that would never forget her name, because Evelyn Blackthorne had learned something powerful. The world could trap you, could try to silence you, could build walls and systems and institutions designed to keep you invisible. But if you refused to disappear, if you fought back with everything you had, if you built something larger than yourself, you could change the world, one woman at a time, one connection at a time, one revolution at a time, and London would never be the same. The trial of Lord Carrington Vale began on a grey morning in November, 6 weeks after his arrest. Evelyn sat in the gallery with Blackthorne at her side, watching as Vale was led into the courtroom in chains. He'd aged in those 6 weeks, face gaunt, eyes sunken, the arrogance stripped away to reveal something smaller underneath. The prosecution's case was devastating. Document after document, witness after witness, the foreman who'd covered up deaths, the building inspector who'd taken bribes, the accountant who'd falsified records, and the women. So many women. Catherine testified about her daughter's death from typhoid, about 15 years of poverty that had started with a butler's crime in Vale's factories. Mary spoke about working from age 8, about watching her mother die from exhaustion. A widow described her husband's death in a factory accident, crushed between machinery that hadn't been inspected in 5 years. Vale's solicitor tried to discredit them, called them unreliable, suggested they were being manipulated, but there were too many of them, and their stories aligned too perfectly with the documentary evidence. On the 4th day, the prosecution called Evelyn. She walked to the witness stand feeling every eye in the courtroom on her. This was the moment Vale's defense had been waiting for, a chance to paint her as the hysterical duchess, the unreliable woman whose vendetta had manufactured evidence. The prosecutor was gentle. Mrs. Blackthorne, would you describe your first encounter with conditions in Lord Vale's factories? Evelyn took a breath, told the truth. Not in flowery language or dramatic rhetoric, but in precise, documented detail. The wages she'd recorded, the women she'd helped, the network she'd built not out of charity, but out of recognition that the system was fundamentally broken. Vale's solicitor stood for cross-examination. He was good. She'd give him that. He questioned her credentials. Why should anyone believe a woman with no formal education, no expertise in labor conditions? I have eyes, Evelyn said simply. I can see when children are starving, when women are dying. You don't need credentials to recognize suffering. But you admit you have a personal grudge against Lord Vale, that he had you committed to an asylum? He had me kidnapped and drugged because I was exposing his crimes. If that's a personal grudge, then yes, I'm deeply grudging about being imprisoned for telling the truth. A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. The solicitor's face reddened. You claim to speak for workers, but you're a duchess. How can you possibly understand their lives? Evelyn met his eyes. I was sold into a marriage to settle my father's debts. I spent weeks in a house that felt like a prison. I know what it's like to be treated as property. The difference is that my prison had nice furniture and servants. Theirs had factory floors and starvation wages. But we were all trapped by the same system, one that treats people as commodities. The courtroom went very quiet. No further questions, the solicitor said quietly. The verdict came down a week later, guilty on all counts: fraud, bribery, criminal negligence, forgery, unlawful imprisonment. Vale was sentenced to 20 years. His assets were to be liquidated, the proceeds distributed to the families of workers who died in his factories. It wasn't enough. 20 years could never balance the scales of what he'd done, but it was something. Evelyn watched him being led away and felt not triumph, but exhaustion. This had been one man, one network of corruption. How many more were out there, operating in shadows? Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Not just workers this time, but journalists, politicians, people who'd been watching the trial unfold. One of them stepped forward, a member of Parliament named Thomas Harding, known for his reform efforts. Mrs. Blackthorne, might I have a word? Blackthorne's hand tightened on her arm, protective.
But Evelyn nodded. The work you've done, Harding said, exposing Vale's operations, it's opened eyes. There are others in Parliament who've been trying to pass labor reform for years. We've been blocked at every turn by men like Vale. But now with this trial, with the public attention, we have momentum. What are you asking? Help us. Testify before Parliament. Share what you've learned, the networks you've built. They're evidence that reform is possible, that people want change. He paused. We need voices like yours. People who've seen the reality, not just read about it in reports. Evelyn looked at Blackthorne. He gave the slightest nod. Your choice. I'll do it, she said. But I want something in return. Harding blinked. What? The women who testified, the ones from my network. They're risking everything by speaking publicly. I want assurances that they'll be protected. Jobs, housing, legal protection against retaliation. I can't promise, then I can't help you. Evelyn's voice was steel. I'm done with reforms that protect the powerful while leaving the vulnerable exposed. If you want my testimony, you guarantee their safety. Otherwise, find someone else. Harding studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. You drive a hard bargain, Your Grace. I've had good teachers. They shook hands, and as they did, Evelyn felt something shift, not just in this moment, but in the larger machinery of power. A crack had formed. Light was getting in. Over the next 6 months, everything changed. Evelyn testified before Parliament 3 times. Each appearance drew crowds. Newspapers covered every word. She spoke not as a duchess performing charity, but as someone who'd done the work, who had names and numbers and evidence. The Factory Reform Act passed in March. It wasn't perfect. Compromises had been made. Loopholes existed. But it established minimum wages, limited working hours for children, required safety inspections. It was a start. The women's network grew beyond anything Evelyn had imagined. What had begun with 30 women helping each other find work had become an organization with 100 members, then 300. They called themselves the London Women's League. They met weekly, shared resources, organized when employers tried to retaliate. Catherine ran it now. The woman who'd lost her daughter had transformed her grief into something powerful. She was harder than Evelyn, less willing to compromise, which was exactly what the League needed. You built this, ma'am, Catherine said one evening when Evelyn visited their meeting hall, a rented space in Southwark, barely furnished but alive with energy. You showed us we didn't have to accept what they gave us. I just connected people. You all did the actual work. Don't diminish it. You gave us something no one else would. You treated us like we mattered. Catherine's voice softened. My daughter died because people like Vale saw her as disposable. You saw us as human. That's why this exists. Evelyn looked around the room. Women talking, organizing, planning. Some were former factory workers. Some were widows. Some were young girls who'd been given a chance to learn trades instead of dying in mills. This was the real victory. Not Vale's conviction, not the legislation. This room full of women who'd learned they had power. At Thornfield, things changed too. Blackthorne moved his belongings from the West Wing. Not all at once. He was too methodical for that. But gradually, his books appeared in the library Evelyn had claimed. His correspondence started arriving at Thornfield instead of his city apartments. His presence shifted from occasional to permanent. They learned each other slowly. How Evelyn needed silence in the mornings to think. How Blackthorne worked best at night, papers spread across the dining table. How they both hated small talk but could argue about philosophy for hours. It wasn't romance. Not the kind novels described. They didn't have grand declarations or dramatic reconciliations. But late at night, working side by side on legislation drafts, Evelyn would look up and find Blackthorne watching her with something that looked like wonder. What? She'd ask. Nothing, just, you're remarkable. I'm stubborn. Same thing. And sometimes, when exhaustion caught up with them both, they'd fall asleep in the library. Evelyn would wake to find Blackthorne's coat draped over her shoulders, or she'd notice him leaving extra candles lit so she could work late without straining her eyes. Small things, quiet things, but they added up to something neither of them had planned for. One night, 3 months after Vale's trial, They were reviewing worker housing proposals when Blackthorn set down his pen. I need to tell you something. Evelyn looked up. His face was serious. When I married you, he said slowly, I thought I was completing a transaction, settling your father's debt, gaining a wife who'd manage my household and stay out of my way. I know. I was wrong about what I wanted, about what I needed. He met her eyes. You terrify me, Evelyn. Your courage, your absolute refusal to compromise when something matters. The way you walked into hell and dragged half of London with you. That's not... Let me finish. He stood, walked to the window. I built my entire life around control, predictability, keeping distance from anything that might hurt me. And then you came in and destroyed all of it, made me care about things I'd been ignoring, made me want to be better than I was. Evelyn's throat tightened. Alistair, I'm falling in love with you, probably already have. He turned back to her. I don't know if you feel the same way, I don't expect you to, but I needed you to know that this, he gestured at the space between them, is an obligation anymore. At least not for me. The confession hung in the air. Evelyn stood, walked to him. For a moment, she just looked at this man who'd been a stranger, who'd become an ally, who'd stood beside her when the world tried to destroy her. I don't know if I love you, she said honestly. I don't know if I know how. But I know that when they took me to that asylum, the thing that kept me fighting was knowing you'd come, that I wasn't alone. You're never alone, not anymore. She reached up and touched his face. He leaned into her hand like he'd been waiting for permission to be human. We're a disaster, she said softly. You're emotionally distant. I'm reckless. Neither of us knows how to do this. True. But I'd like to try, if you're willing to be patient while I figure out what this is. I have nothing but patience for you. They stood there in the library, London's night sounds filtering through the windows, and Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, she'd never have that, but possibility. The chance to build something real from the ruins of their transaction. A year after Vale's arrest, Evelyn received a letter. It was from Sarah, the attendant who'd helped her escape the asylum. She'd left that job, used the money Evelyn had paid her to move her sister to the countryside where the air was cleaner. The sister was recovering. Sarah had found work in a shop. I wanted to thank you, the letter said, not just for the help, but for showing me that we don't have to accept what we're given, that we can fight for better. My sister lives because you refused to stay silent. I won't forget that. Evelyn added it to a box she kept, letters from women she'd helped, reminders of why the work mattered. There were dozens now. Some were simple thank yous, others were updates, jobs found, children saved, lives rebuilt. A few were requests for help with new problems. The work never ended. But that was fine. She'd never expected it to. That afternoon, she and Blackthorn had a meeting with the London Women's League. Plans for a new initiative. Education programs for working women. Basic literacy. Mathematics. Skills that would let them move beyond factory floors. Catherine was there. Mary, nearly 15 now, and fierce as a blade. A dozen others whose names Evelyn knew, whose stories she'd documented. We have funding for the first school, Blackthorn reported. 3 more if the trial program succeeds. Location in Southwark, near the factories. Teachers? Catherine asked. We have 4 volunteers, all women, all former workers themselves. Mary leaned forward. What about the men who'll try to stop it? Factory owners who don't want educated workers? Let them try, Evelyn said. We'll document every attempt, take it to the press, make it impossible to shut us down quietly. They'll fight dirty. So will we. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Plans were made, responsibilities divided. By the end, they had a framework that might actually work. Walking home through London's streets, Blackthorn glanced at Evelyn. You're smiling. Am I? Yes. It's unsettling. You're usually scowling at problems. I'm scowling at this one too, but also... She paused. Do you realize what we just did? We're building a school, a real one, for women who've never had access to education. We're building several schools. If this works, it will work, because it has to. He took her hand. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Thornfield. The house looked different now, less like a mausoleum, more like a home. Lights burned in the windows. Mrs. Hewitt had started hosting the occasional league meeting in the servants' hall. The library was in constant use. The place Evelyn had been brought to disappear had become the center of a quiet revolution. 5 years after the trial, Parliament passed the Women's Employment Protection Act. It prohibited firing women for pregnancy, required equal consideration for promotions, established penalties for workplace harassment. It wasn't enough. Laws on paper didn't change hearts. But it was movement, progress. The London Women's League had grown to 1,500 members, 5 schools operating across London, a network that extended into other cities: Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool. Women organizing, helping each other, refusing to be invisible. Evelyn's role had shifted. She wasn't running things anymore. Catherine and the other leaders were better at that. Instead, she testified, wrote, connected politicians with workers, used her title and her husband's influence to open doors, then stepped aside and let the women walk through. It wasn't the revolution she dreamed of in those early angry days. Systems changed slowly. Progress came in inches. But it came. One evening, standing in Thornfield's library with Blackthorne reviewing legislation drafts, Evelyn looked up from the papers. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd just accepted it? Stayed in this house? Been a proper duchess? Blackthorne considered. Honestly, no. I don't think you're capable of accepting injustice quietly. I could have tried. You'd have gone mad. Actually mad. Not the fictional kind Vale tried to sell. He set down his pen. You were always going to fight. The only question was whether you'd do it alone. I'm glad I didn't have to. Me too. They'd learned to say things like that now. Small admissions of need, of care. It had taken years, but they'd built something real from the wreckage of their arranged marriage. Not perfect. They still argued, still frustrated each other. Blackthorne was still too cautious sometimes. Evelyn was still too reckless. But they'd learned to balance each other, to push and pull until they found the right path forward. The library door opened. Mrs. Hewitt appeared, looking apologetic. Begging your pardon, but there's a delegation from Manchester, women from the mills. They've come asking for help organizing. Evelyn looked at Blackthorne. He nodded. Send them in, she said. The women who entered were familiar, not their faces, but their exhaustion, their desperation, their determination. We heard about the League, their leader said, about what you've done in London. We want to build something similar, but we don't know how to start. Evelyn felt the weight of it. More work, more battles, more women counting on her, but also more voices, more strength, more proof that change was possible. Sit, she said. Tell us what you need. They talked until midnight, shared strategies, contact information, resources. When the Manchester women finally left, Evelyn felt the familiar exhaustion settling into her bones. You should rest, Blackthorne said, in a moment. She walked to the window, looked out at London, the city that had tried to erase her, that had thrown every obstacle it could in her path, the city she'd changed anyway, not completely. Not perfectly. There were still factories with horrible conditions, still men like Vale operating in shadows, still systems designed to exploit the vulnerable. But there were also schools now, laws, organizations, women who knew they had power, and that mattered. Blackthorne came to stand beside her. What are you thinking? That we're not done. We'll never be done. That's the point. I know. She leaned against him. But we've proven something important, which is that the system can be fought, that one person or 2 or 1,000 can make a difference. She turned to face him. Vale thought he could silence me by trapping me here. Instead, he gave me the time and resources to build something he couldn't destroy. Poetic justice, satisfying justice. They stood together in the window of Thornfield House, the place Evelyn had been brought to disappear, now transformed into something entirely different. A home, a headquarters, a symbol that even the most trapped woman could break free and remake the world. Outside, London slept and dreamed and breathed. Inside, Evelyn Blackthorne stood with her husband and felt, for the first time in her life, like she belonged exactly where she was. Not because someone had placed her there, but because she'd chosen it, and that made all the difference. 20 years later, long after Vale had died in prison, long after the factory system had been reformed piece by piece, long after the London Women's League had become a national institution, a young woman stood in front of Thornfield House, staring up at the gray stone walls. She was 18, desperate. Her father had just lost everything to gambling debts. She was being married off to settle them. The wedding was tomorrow. She'd come to the only place she could think of, the house where the famous Duchess of Blackthorne lived, the woman who'd changed England's labor laws, who'd fought the most powerful men in the country and won, the woman who proved that being trapped didn't mean being broken. The door opened. An elderly woman with sharp eyes looked out. "Can I help you? I need to speak with the Duchess. Please, I don't know what else to do." Mrs. Hewitt, now nearly 80 but still formidable, studied the girl, saw the desperation, the determination. "Come in," she said. "Her Grace is in the library." The girl followed her through corridors that felt less like a prison than a sanctuary, through doors that opened onto rooms filled with light and purpose. Evelyn looked up when they entered. She was 62 now, hair silver, face lined with years of work and worry and triumph. But her eyes were the same, sharp, fearless, refusing to look away from injustice. "Mrs. Hewitt tells me you need help," Evelyn said. The girl nodded, words tumbling out. The debt, the marriage, the feeling of being sold like property. Evelyn listened. When the girl finished, she set down her pen. "What's your name?" "Elizabeth. Elizabeth Marsh." "Well, Elizabeth, let me tell you what I learned a long time ago." Evelyn stood, walked to the window. "Being trapped isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. The question isn't whether you'll escape. It's what you'll build when you do." "But I can't escape. The marriage is tomorrow." "Can't you?" Evelyn turned back to her. "Or are you just assuming you have no choices because that's what they've told you?" Elizabeth stared at her. "Here's what's going to happen," Evelyn continued. "You're going to stay here tonight. Tomorrow, you're going to that wedding, and you're going to make a choice, not the one your father wants or society expects, but the one you can live with." "What if I choose wrong?" "Then you'll make different choices later, but at least they'll be yours." She handed Elizabeth a card, the London Women's League, contact information. "If you need help, real help, not charity, come here. We'll find you work, housing, whatever you need to build a life that belongs to you." Elizabeth took the card with shaking hands. "Why are you helping me?" Evelyn smiled. "Because someone once asked me the same question, and the answer is simple. Because I can. Because I refuse to let another woman disappear into a system designed to erase her." That night, Elizabeth Marsh stayed in Thornfield House, slept in rooms where another trapped woman had once plotted revolution. The next morning, she went to her wedding. But she went armed with something powerful, the knowledge that she had choices, that being trapped was temporary, that she could fight. What she chose, Evelyn never knew, but she'd given the girl the most important thing she could, the understanding that her life belonged to her, and that was enough. Evelyn Blackthorne died at 73, in her library at Thornfield, surrounded by books and papers and the evidence of a life spent fighting. Her funeral drew thousands. Workers, activists, politicians, women from across England who'd been touched by her work. They didn't mourn quietly. They celebrated, spoke about what she'd built, how she'd changed their lives. Blackthorne, now 80, moving slowly but still sharp, stood at the front and said only this. She was supposed to disappear. This city tried to erase her. Instead, she made herself unforgettable, not through spectacle or drama, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to be silent. She wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. She pushed too hard sometimes, trusted the wrong people occasionally, but she never stopped fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And because of that, because she refused to accept the world as it was, London will never forget Evelyn Harrow Blackthorne, the woman who was meant to disappear, the woman who changed everything instead. In the years after her death, the London Women's League grew into a national movement. Schools bearing her name opened across England. Labor laws she'd fought for became standard practice. And in Thornfield House, now a museum and headquarters for the League, young women came to learn about the Duchess who'd proved that one person could change the world. They stood in her library, read her letters, studied her maps. And they learned the most important lesson Evelyn had left behind. You don't need permission to fight injustice. You don't need power to make a difference. You just need courage, connection, and the absolute refusal to disappear. The rest is just details. And London, that great grinding city that tried to erase so many women. London remembered. Because Evelyn Blackthorne had made sure it had no choice. She'd fought too hard, built too much, changed too many lives. She'd walked into a marriage meant to silence her and turned it into a revolution. And in doing so, she'd proven something powerful. That even the most trapped, most powerless, most invisible woman could become absolutely unforgettable if she just refused to disappear.